Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Therapy with Ari. I'm your host Ari, and in today's episode, I want to talk a little bit about a topic that comes up surprisingly often, both in my work as a therapist and in my own life. The topic is finding meaning and purpose. Now, it's important to recognize that there's all kinds of different ways that people can find meaning and purpose in their lives. And today's video is not meant as a one-size-fits-all solution to this eternal human issue. But what I do want to share with you today is a kind of experience that I keep stumbling into that's shown me at least one way of actively creating meaning in my life that in the past I would have dismissed and even purposefully avoided. So in today's episode, I'm going to talk about what that looked like for me, why it might matter for you, and how you could start to put some effort towards the same thing in your own life if meaning and purpose are topics that you find yourself thinking about often. So let's get into it. I can speak from firsthand experience when I say that a lot of people struggle to find purpose in the activity that takes up a huge portion of their lives, the work they do for money. This used to be my reality before I switched careers, and I know how difficult and demoralizing it can feel. Like so many others, my job felt less like a calling and more like a trade-off between long hours, constant stress, and a sense of just going through the motions, balanced against a paycheck that gave me enough reason to keep going back despite the emptiness and lack of purpose I felt on a daily basis. If this sounds familiar to you, it's because it's a surprisingly common occurrence and something I see in my work with my clients all the time. Some jobs really don't offer much in the way of meaning or joy, and often I find clients getting stuck on the idea that their work must be meaningful, or else they're doing something wrong. Now, I'm not suggesting that looking for meaningful work is a bad strategy, but here's an important point that I want to stress that may sometimes be overlooked. Purpose isn't something that's only found in the work we do. In fact, some of the deepest meaning we can create in our lives comes from the kinds of work we often overlook, avoid, or dismiss as just chores or an unnecessary project. And an important distinction is even reflected in the language that we use when we talk about purpose and meaning. We often say we're looking for meaning or finding our purpose in something. But what I'm suggesting here is a more active and intentional approach, creating meaning. If you find yourself in a situation where the external circumstances of your life aren't providing meaning for you, where you're not finding meaning in the things you're doing, there's a way to create it by putting effort into tasks that don't necessarily have external rewards, that feel exhausting or even mundane at times, and yet, paradoxically, are the activities that can make you feel most alive because they're completely self-directed and come from within. Whether it's building something with your own two hands, caring for a space or a living thing, or tackling a challenging personal project, there's a certain benefit to this kind of work that's overlooked and poorly understood. Now, I'd like to pause for a moment here and linger on this idea of finding versus creating meaning. When we talk about finding meaning, it often implies that it already exists somewhere out there waiting for us in a career or a relationship or a life circumstance. And while that can of course happen, it's also easy to spend years searching for that perfect circumstance only to feel frustrated or disappointed because you can't find what you're looking for. Creating meaning, on the other hand, puts the power back in your hands. And while more difficult in a certain sense, it's also more empowering as a way of life. It means that instead of waiting for life to hand you purpose, you actively generate it through the choices you make and the effort you put in. This shift from passive searching to active creation is subtle but profound. It turns ordinary, sometimes menial tasks into opportunities for engagement, growth, and a sense of accomplishment. And not only that, as a general idea, it shifts the locus of control from outside events that are not necessarily in your control back inward to a place where you have much more control. There's also evidence to back up some of these claims. Psychologists have found that effort itself plays a crucial role in creating value and meaning. The more energy and focus we invest in an activity, the more we tend to appreciate it. This is a phenomenon sometimes referred to as the effort heuristic. In other words, we don't just value the result of our work, we value the process itself. This is why the things we build, grow, or accomplish through our own effort, even small everyday tasks, can leave a lasting sense of satisfaction that's hard to replicate through passive or less demanding activities. Now that we understand why effort itself can generate meaning, the question becomes, how do we put this into practice in our everyday lives? One key is to notice the tasks we often avoid or dismiss as mundane, like chores around the house, small projects, or even challenging personal goals, and approach them intentionally with the understanding that willful effort often results in a meaningful and positive sense of satisfaction. By investing our energy fully, even into these seemingly ordinary tasks, we transform them into opportunities for engagement, growth, and yes, even purpose. The very things we resist or procrastinate on can be the activities that leave us feeling most accomplished and connected to our own sense of purpose. Of course, I know some of you might be thinking, well, this sounds nice in theory, but it feels like lying to myself about things I hate doing. And that's a fair point. I'm not suggesting that you turn every unpleasant task into a source of joy or that all work magically becomes meaningful somehow. Some tasks are simply tedious, frustrating, or exhausting, and it's okay to acknowledge that. But sometimes, when life doesn't give you many options, the only choice left is to learn to find contentment in what you do have. Practicing gratitude is a perfect example of this, as I talked about in one of my last videos. It's effortful to intentionally notice and appreciate the things we often take for granted. But when we do, the result is a real, tangible sense of satisfaction and well being. The point isn't to pretend life is perfect, because it's certainly not. It's to notice that the effort we invest, even in small acts of reflection or appreciation, can create a meaningful shift in how we experience our lives. All of this brings me back to my own experience of this sense of purpose and meaning when I first started taking on projects around my home. I quickly realized that even small building projects teach you lessons about effort, persistence, and the satisfaction of creation. One of the most powerful ways to create meaning in your life is simply by going out there and trying to build something. When you take on a project like this, no matter how small it seems, you're confronted with the realities of effort, how hard it is to actually make something from nothing, the mistakes you'll encounter along the way, and the problem solving it requires. In the process, you learn skills you didn't have before and gain a deeper appreciation for the work that goes into creation in general. And at the end, you're left with something concrete, something that didn't exist before and that you brought into being through your own effort. Importantly, this doesn't mean you need to go out and buy a bunch of tools or materials. Some of the most meaningful projects start small, with whatever you have on hand, like scrap wood, leftover materials, or even just ideas. The value isn't in the resources, it's in the engagement, effort, and sense of accomplishment that comes from creating. This principle doesn't just apply to physical building, by the way. It also shows up in creative work in all kinds of unexpected ways. For me, for example, creating my YouTube channel has been a clear manifestation of this idea. I spend time making videos not because I want to be famous or chase external validation, but because I genuinely enjoy creating something that I find interesting and useful, even though it takes a lot of time and effort and doesn't necessarily translate to anything more than a few views and clicks. The act of creating content, planning ideas, and shaping them into a finished video engages me fully. It challenges me and gives me a sense of accomplishment in all the same ways that building a physical project does. It's a reminder that meaning can come from any form of self-directed activity, whether it's building, writing, or sharing ideas, as long as the effort is intentional and personally significant. And the most interesting part of all this is that sometimes I find that a particularly sticky problem with one of my projects captures my attention so fully that I'm completely engrossed in it, even when I'm not actively working on it. My mind is exercising its creative thinking muscle while I'm going for a walk, or in the shower, or even when I'm trying to sleep at night, and is tackling the issue from a variety of angles in order to figure out a way forward. So, the main takeaway from all this is that it doesn't require grand projects or expensive tools or even the most meaningful job in the world to create meaning in life. You can create meaning in smaller, everyday efforts with the right kind of attitude, whether it's fixing something around the house, organizing a space, cooking a meal from scratch, or tackling a challenging task at work that you've been putting off. What matters is not the size of the task, but the intention and effort you bring to it. When you approach these activities mindfully, giving them your full attention, even menial tasks can become opportunities for growth, learning, and satisfaction. Often, the very things we resist or avoid are the ones that have the potential to give us the most meaningful experiences. It doesn't mean that you're going to find meaning in the exact same ways that I did, but you will almost certainly be able to increase the sense of purpose in your life if you approach things with this mentality. Ultimately, this all comes back to a simple but powerful idea. We spend so much of our lives trying to avoid work, distraction, or things that feel tedious, but it's often exactly through this effort and this work that we discover purpose. By choosing to engage fully, whether it's building, creating, or even tackling everyday tasks, you're actively creating meaning in your lives. And the more you notice and embrace this, the more you realize that meaning isn't something you have to wait for. It's something you can cultivate in the here and now, with whatever opportunities and challenges you have in front of you. Thank you so much for joining me on another one of these videos. I hope you get as much out of them as I do when I create them. And I also hope that it gives you some food for thought if you find yourself bored and unsure what to do with some of your time. Just remember, even small intentional efforts can create a real sense of purpose. For now, take care, and I'll see you next time.